Welcome back to Steve & Friends. This week we have a special guest, Stephen Grumbine. Stephen is the founder, president, and CEO of Real Progressives. He also hosts a very popular weekly podcast called Macro and Cheese. Enjoy the show. Welcome back to Steve & Friends. It's February 25th, 2023. We have a very special guest this week, Stephen Grumbine. To kind of give some context, Stephen runs realprogressives.org and a very popular and one of my favorite podcasts on the internet to this date called Macro and Cheese, where he has a number of heterodox guests, scientists, MMTers, Steve Keen multiple times, Hudson, Mosler, a bunch of people. So I thought it was very important that we have him on the Steve & Friends podcast because he is a friend of Steve. He is a friend of mine. So we're happy you're tuning in. I guess I'll go through the housekeeping. If you're watching on YouTube right now, make sure you hit the like button. That helps the algorithm, of course. Make sure you subscribe. If you're on Twitter, make sure you hit the retweet button and hit the like button. Then come over to YouTube at Prof. Steve Keen and join the conversation. We've been doing this on the side here now for almost a month. It's pretty successful. Very little trolls, although I'm waiting for that challenge, the troll challenge, where I get to shadow ban you. So I challenge you. I guess some other housekeeping. I'll bring up a little chart here. I've been playing around with Ravel. And Ravel's a commercial extension of Minsky, and it basically takes data in, and then you can manipulate it with a little wheel and pull out all your different dimensions. The blue line in the graph is our minutes watched. So what's most important to the the YouTube algorithm is how long a viewer stays on the program. We're a live stream, so this is data from the first 60 minutes of our shows, and the blue line's been going up for the last month. I attribute that mostly to me and my good work. I'm kidding. It's actually Dan in the background as well, myself, and Steve Keen having a very good internet connection and being with us on a timely manner. He's not in the show yet, but I imagine he will show up eventually. That aside, I want to keep that line moving up into the stratospheres if we can. The key is, even if you're not here for the live stream, you're going to watch this later on. So what that blue line is doing is making sure we're getting additional impressions. So over the next month, like for instance, this episode will be shown over the YouTube platform, either in the suggestions, your home page at YouTube. And, this good information that we do, Daniel and I and Steve, gets out to the people. And the guests that we have guests that are scientists, people that are part of political movements, that are looking out for the people in society, economists, really great thinkers. And we just want to get this out to as many people as possible. I'll bring that down. I'll bring in my buddy, Daniel Sanderson.
Hey, my buddy.
Daniel, how you doing, buddy?
Wonderful. It's a great Saturday morning. The sun is shining, and I'm happy to be here.
Perfect. Okay, well, anything important happened this week in your life?
No, I stayed healthy, and I think that's good enough for me.
Oh, wow. That's so interesting. I'm going to bring on our guest now because I think he's going to have a little more oomph on a Saturday morning than you, Daniel.
Yeah.
We'll bring him on right now, the man, Steve Grumbine.
Hey, how are you doing, guys?
Great. It is great to actually have you on the show. You are the man in my eyes. Steve Keen is not here yet. So what I want to do is maybe talk about your movement, Real Progressives, how it started, when it started, where were you on the political spectrum before it started, and how have you evolved over time to 2023?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. And second of all, you were one of our guests, Ty. I noticed how you left that out. You were one of our guests. So that makes you a pretty special dude, too. It's very nice to meet you as well, Daniel. So thank you both for having me on. So Real Progressive started in 2015. And we started it as kind of a rebuttal to a thing called Real Democrats. And Real Democrats was largely just a bunch of standard corporate Democrats that felt like Hillary Clinton was the bomb and she was the best thing since sliced bread. And they were ready to basically shame anyone that wasn't willing to fall in line for Hillary Clinton. And so we started Real Progressives in support largely of Stephanie Kelton because I didn't really know Bernie Sanders yet. I was still kind of in a political, I don't even know what you want to call it, like kind of a political desert. I had been moving from the very, very far right to where I am now, which is pretty far to the left, just to say it nicely. But I grew up in a very, very conservative household, worshipped and revered Ronald Reagan, voted for George Bush Sr., Herbert Walker Bush, voted for Bob Dole, voted for W, little shrub, who would be Bush's son, twice, then voted for McCain. And I actually campaigned for and fought tooth and nail for Ron Paul in 2012. So I have been a right winger most of my life. And once I learned, actually, I should say before that, that I had gotten a master's science in technology management and a master of business administration and had taken quite a bit of the standard neoclassical economics. And coming from a bit more of a libertarian perspective, I had the Austrian and praxeology stuff going on in the back of my head, the gold bug thinking and so forth. And the MMT lens that I began learning back around, I don't know, I guess 2009 really kind of took hold of me. There wasn't all the fancy stuff we have today to all the cute videos and memes and short books and airport reads. It was really more, you had to really want it. You had to read white papers. You had to read blog posts and watch grainy video. So being an MMTer was a hard-earned deal, but all that showed me most of the things that I had been taught were lies. And a lot of the things that made me feel politically were founded in my lack of understanding of how money worked and where money came from. So in the end, you could say that my journey took me from being a radical right winger. I would call myself a Christo-fascist at the time. Um, through a drive-by through the libertarian world and Ron Paul, and an even shorter drive-by through the corporate Democratic Party. And now I guess you could say that I'm a MMT-informed, heterodox-informed leftist that is looking to change the world. And so Real Progressives started as a support for Bernie Sanders and is now largely focused on developing a theory of power, a theory of understanding of how money and the left work together, and working with activists. We're not presuming to be academics. We're presuming to talk to the people on the street. We're presuming to talk to rank and file voters. Also people maybe came through the world through my walk, the way I got here, and trying to reach them in a language that hits them the way they need to hear it versus the way maybe some people who are a little bit more privileged maybe would hear it. So that's kind of the genesis of it. And Real Progressives had a bunch of video content, had a whole bunch of different angles that we focused on. We had 7 key knowledge areas. It started with economic justice, then it was environmental and ecological justice, peace with justice, equality with justice, democracy, health and well-being, and technology and innovation. Those are our 7 knowledge areas. And we have 4 pillars that we operate in, which is the policy pillar, the education pillar, the activism pillar, and the media pillar. So we kind of build like a tic-tac-toe board of grid of sorts, economic justice, media, and so forth. So, and out of that framework came the podcast that we know and love as Macro and Cheese. Macro Cheese has been going for about 4 years now. We're up in the 210 episodes. We release weekly Saturday mornings. In fact, this morning we released a podcast on the 4 freedoms from Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who many consider to be the greatest president of the United States history. And that was very interesting. And so here we are. I get to talk to guys like Steve Keen and Warren Mosler. And I've, in fact, had the opportunity to host a debate between these 2 heavy hitters in the past. And I get to talk to all kinds of authors and economists and deal with people that are doing movement building in terms of, building grassroots organizations and so forth. So lots changed over the years, but the message is still the same.
Well, that's fascinating. Steve, I'm really looking forward to our conversation. I don't know how much of the dialogue will be my questions to you, but I find personally that I'm liberal, right? So for all the Americans out there, I'm Democrat. My mind, my intellect is rooting for the democratic values, the liberal, not libertarian values.
Sure.
But I think I have a similar upbringing as you do in a conservative route. I was somebody that went to university, undergrad in business, and I've been an entrepreneur my entire life. And so there's a common sense where I say that my feet are in a conservative position and my head is in a liberal position. So I can't get closer to center than the span of my 5'10". Like, it's just not possible, right? And what I've been hungering for is a good argument. And I don't mean argumentation. I mean, I want to hear a good argument from the Democratic side, from the liberals. I want to hear that good argument because the conversations that I've been involved with as of late have been largely from the right. And I've been more sympathizing with their perspective, understanding the wisdom, not ridiculing them. But I'm still hungering for coherent liberal arguments. How do you elevate the argument, and how do you do that in a podcast?
I'll interrupt this train of thought here, and then we'll go right back to Steve. The other Steve Keen is here, so I just want to bring him on, and then I want Steve. I want you to answer Daniel's question. Sorry for breaking that up.
That's okay.
Mr. Keen, the man.
All right, hey Steve. Yeah, mate.
He is.
I've got to move back to Amsterdam to get decent internet, as amongst some other fun things you get in Amsterdam. God, it sucks over here in London.
You're sounding clear, so I'm assuming have you plugged in a cable to your computer for the internet?
No, I've got a new one of these things, which was supposed to give me decent internet. I get 2 megabits upload and download speed if I'm lucky. I feel like I've become one of the 4 Yorkshiremen. They actually went.
Perfect.
So, I'll do the best I can before I drop out yet again.
You know what? You're coming in clear. I'm going to let Steve Grumbine finish his train of thought here, and then we'll get you in the conversation. Steve, carry on.
Well, Daniel, the one thing I would say is that I did a drive-by in the center, and it was unappetizing to me. It was too much like Zwieback cookies, so I kept going left. I just couldn't help myself. I just felt the pull. But the question is very interesting to me. So a lot of people have found sympathy in the right wing these days. Obviously, the Democrats in the United States, not only have they not delivered anything that they've said they would deliver, but they have also factually been caught lying so many times. And when you are somebody that is trying to convince others that we can do bold things, and the party in power shows more energy and willingness to fight when they're out of power than when they're in power, it's very hard to make the case that they should remain in power. Okay. So the right, in particular, the folks that I end up fighting with are the libertarians. And, the debate, you can have a kind of sort of debate about state theory of money and saying, where does money generate from? And how do we get money into the economy? And so, in other words, you're plaguing us to all be in private debt to take out a bunch of loans to fill the economy up. You're rejecting the sovereign issuing currency to support the needs of the people. That's an easy one to get started with. The problem is that you realize, especially somebody like myself who has already gone through my libertarian training, got my Creature from Jekyll Isle backpack and all the other little tools that come with it. You find that it's ideological. It's not a fact-based discussion. It really, the facts are almost irrelevant in a lot of these conversations because they're driven by a sort of belief, a belief, almost like a religious belief, a belief in things that they can't explain, a belief in things that are unseen. And so one of the big things I do is I talk about austerity as murder. And it's a shocking statement, but it's a statement nonetheless that has been proven out by studies in the UK that show austerity breeds social murder. And they show that hundreds of thousands of people have died as a result of austerity. And you can go back to Engels and see that he called austerity social murder. And the more you dig into the libertarian belief system of starving the currency issuer from issuing currency, and the more you realize that, like Ron Paul, who was my hero at the time, in a debate when asked about what he would do with FEMA, which is the Federal Emergency Management Group, these guys, he was like, I'd get rid of FEMA. And they said, well, what would you do, Ron? He goes, 1900. You're like, 1900? What does that mean? You find out there was a hurricane that had come through Galveston, Texas in 1900. And the poor were basically held at gunpoint to clean up the dead bodies. And that was their payment as receiving welfare and stuff was, hey, you're going to work for that. And when I realized that, I was so repulsed and revolted by the mindset. I could no longer embrace it. But a lot of them are hell-bent on that mindset now. And it always catches fire in younger people because of like the Fountainhead and, who's John Galt, right? I mean, we're talking about the Ayn Rand Society is very alluring to younger people. And so right now, unfortunately, is the rise of the libertarian right. And you see a little bit of what we would call a red-brown alliance with people that I would consider fellow travelers on the left, finding common ground with people on the right here. It's not a belief that I share at this point because I don't believe there's enough theory. There's not enough understanding of the real problems at play, and they're fighting straw men. But it doesn't change the fact that that's the battlefield that we're left with to convey thoughts to. So how do you do that? I think that the right tends to like to be challenged more. I think the left oftentimes will run when challenged. I think the right is ready for a fight. And I think that for people that aren't familiar with being a right winger, have not experienced that world, that it seems, oh my God, why are they being mean? What's going on? The reality is that, and I said this offline, I'll say it now, the Romulans find apologetics and being sorry and being what they consider beta to be a sign of weakness, and they don't respect that. So they're looking for someone that's willing to hold the line, go toe to toe. They're looking for that guy when they walk into the bar that they can stand behind and walk into the bar and know nobody's going to mess with them. It's a reactionary world. It's a world full of measuring each other by each other. And if you understand that that's kind of the fear-based reactionary tactics, to try and talk to them as if they're liberals, to talk to them with liberal sensibilities, it may reach them once you've converted them, but it isn't going to reach them then. They're going to just see you as the enemy. So I think that some of this requires different tactics than I think some are really willing to employ, unfortunately.
Well, I'll tell you what. I mean, you can join us, but I would be happy to walk into any bar with Steve Keen, especially if he's wearing that dark black biker jacket that I've seen him wear a few times. Steve, how you doing?
Very well. I'm healthier than my internet connection, which is not hard. But I think Steve's extremely correct about his perspective of the right. The right gives you something to believe in. And that's because they have a shared value set. And the value set comes with a theory of how the economy operates that is superficially persuasive. And I cop them all the time because they have a go at me about explaining fiat money. There's one bloke who continues sending me emails about how I've made mistakes in my logic. Fuck that. I'm sorry, mate. You're not going to beat me on logic. But they basically want to abolish the banking system. The banking system is the problem because the banks, they see them as fraudulent because they lend out money they haven't got. They don't understand how banks create money. They don't understand how the government creates money. They don't understand the role of money in the economy at all, but it gives them a sort of revolutionary element. We're going to make capitalism what it should have been all the time, and it'll work well, and you'll get what you deserve, et cetera, et cetera. It's all this meritocratic vision of how capitalism operates, and it's very assertive and confrontational in that sense, which is Steve's experienced it personally. The left sort of had that back in the Soviet days, because it was equally, the trouble was the left got a chance to find out how it worked, and it's collapsed, and deservedly so. But the right still thinks, oh, we haven't tried capitalism yet. Give me a break. We've been in it for a quarter of a millennium. But their vision of it won't be capitalism until, and then that gives them this revolutionary and reformist fervor that unites them all, and that gives them a sense of purpose. And because they believe that, unless you undermine the belief itself, you'll never persuade them.
Yeah, I've become very addicted to the Star Trek world of sorts, and looking and seeing how the needs are not capitalized. It's not like you're out there begging. Your needs are tended to. I mean, extras, things that are maybe personal to you, fine, and so forth, but they don't sit there and make you struggle. There's no struggle for needs. And to me, my politics are about making life less struggle, less struggle for people, more access and less struggle.
I can totally relate with that. I've said before, hunger shouldn't motivate you to get a job.
That's right.
The funny thing is when you look at how the right thinks about this, and you can find this in Milton Friedman's writing in particular, they see going to work for a wage as an optional activity. Because if you don't get a decent enough wage, you can take care of yourself. Anyway, we're all subsistence farmers, effectively, and we can decide to down the subsistence farmer if the commercial farmer offers us a better hourly rate than we can get out of selling our subsistence watermelons. And therefore, there's a vision that everything is voluntary in capitalism, including unemployment. Okay, and this when you look at it, the only way to be voluntary is if you had a universal basic income. They propose that, guys, and they go absolutely troppo. But that's fundamentally their background thought is that everything we do is maximizing our utility. At no point are we put with a confrontation where it's either do this or starve to death. But the reality of the power and wealth distribution, pretty much all societies, but especially capitalism, late capitalism, if you don't work, you don't eat. That's not freedom. That's not maximizing your utility. That's compulsion. And if you get them to realize that, but they blame anybody who falls through the cracks. That's your own fault. You're unemployed because it's your own fault. You're homeless because it's your own fault, et cetera, et cetera. It's blame the individual who falls through society's cracks. Celebrate the one who climbs to the top. Effectively ignore that you're in a society to begin with.
Uh-oh. I think we got Steve frozen there.
Yeah, we get some interesting freeze frames of Steve there. I want to talk about austerity just for a minute because it was interesting how you brought up austerity. And let me do something a philosopher would do, a deontological sort of projection into the future. That if and I don't know what your positions are on climate change or where we're headed, but our friend Steve is what the right would call a catastrophist. Okay, and so it's
I
not
share in
looking
that, by the way.
Okay, good. So we all do in this room. Okay, so my issue is that the policies that the left or the people, and I'm saying that the climate is pretty much adopted by the left, at least aggressive measures in response to the climate. And so I don't see how a responsible, truthful, fact-based political party can't not enforce austerity measures in order to get us to meet or exceed the limits that we have to stay within for carbon within our country. And so that's on the table. That's forefront on the table to say, conservatives, liberals, democracy, we need to cut back. That's austerity. So help me unpack how that's not
That's
a reality.
austerity for everybody. That's austerity for everybody, not austerity for the poor. Because if you look at what happens with austerity under now, I mean, the government, doesn't. Rupert Murdoch doesn't suffer when they cut back on Medicare.
Right.
Okay.
So
He buys the hospital. Okay. It's the poor who miss out. The austerity we're talking about in future is fundamentally going to be imposed on the rich to bring them down, because if you're going to hold society together, you can't decide that 30% of them are going to die. That just means that 30% are going to revolt instead, and it may be more than 30%. So you have to say, well, everybody's got to get enough to survive. It's a rationing system, and in rationing, Rupert doesn't get more than anybody else. That's a very, very different version of austerity to the monetary austerity that the right is into.
Yeah, I look at things like what Jason Hickel brings up. Jason Hickel focuses heavily on the imbalance between the global South and the global North. And the fact is, and just let me peel this back to a very specific scenario. In the United States, our healthcare plan requires 1,000 different administrative nonsensical expenditures and choke points that are intended to deny coverage. Okay. And there's 1,000 different insurance companies, and there is a million different ways of denying you coverage, basically. Okay. However, in the United States, this is a terrible plan. Out of necessity, I'm a Medicare for all advocate, but I would rather a national health service completely. I don't want to see a check. I don't want to see a bill. I don't want to know what the cost is. I want that to be covered by the currency issue in government. That said, Medicare right now, if we were to institute it in the United States and get rid of all the private insurance, it would literally be deflationary. It would literally bring down so much of the economic transactions that take place, the gross national product, if you will, based on just healthcare expenditures would plummet, because it is so much more efficient to not go through all the hell that they put us through in the United States. So on paper, it looks like we've it's gone deflationary. It looks different than what it could. But if we streamline that, nationalized it, and made it simplified, it would have the same effect as austerity while simultaneously elevating services. Same thing with transportation. If the United States, as opposed to everybody focused on having their next Tesla, instead we focused on mass transit. We reframed how we build our cities out. Instead of having it sprawling and inefficient, we began building into our energy grid, and we began building into the way we build homes, things that are right from day one, the kind of things that preserve and don't waste energy and don't waste fuel products and so forth. So there's a lot of things that we just simply don't do. The other factor, and this is one that Steve has talked about many times with me, is the idea of looking at things like nuclear energy. And obviously, nuclear is a political landmine of its own making. There's so many gotchas in that conversation. But as you look further into ways of doing this, there are, and Steve, you'll have to forgive me, I don't remember with which rare earth, metal or whatever we're talking about here, but there was one particular form of nuclear that maybe isn't prepared to roll out on a mass scale, whatever. But these are things. There are ways of bringing about energy at a much more efficient manner. I mean, we've got the sun, we've got water, we've got wind. There's a million ways of doing it other than just burning fossil fuels. And so obviously I'm not an engineer, and I do also have a fairly good understanding that there's not enough of these rare earth minerals out there to get us from hitting that crisis. So, I'm a big C guy. I'm a centralized guy. I do look at, having distributed, uh, you know, economics, distributed economies, but I do look at centralization a lot. And I believe that, quite frankly, it's going to require probably some form of military lockdown or some sort of something that's going to take to get us to a point where we have the capability of surviving climate crisis. I don't think, unfortunately, it's going to happen just by natural democratic rule. Unfortunately, I don't think that's going to happen. But austerity to me is about reducing, saying the country doesn't have money, reducing spending on the needs of the people, like healthcare, like providing shelter, the basic needs. And whereas Steve had mentioned a basic income, I would not do a basic income. I would do a basic needs guarantee, because it's the actual things that people need that I want to ensure that they have come hell or high water, regardless of market fluctuations or anything else, the ebbs and flows of political society. I want to make sure people's basic needs are covered. And as you know, you put money in the economy, somebody is going to say, they got more money in the economy. How do we capture that little bit in our bottom ROI? So that's my take on that.
What are your thoughts about the grocery chains? Just, I mean, if you look at one area of an economy, the grocery chains all over the world, they say they become state run and owned, and so there's things on the shelf and people can eat.
I'm all about nationalizing anything. You don't have to push hard to get me to nationalize. I'm right there. Any of that stuff, correct? Especially when it comes to needs. I don't want to be predated on by someone with a profit motive. I want to know that my needs are taken care of to the best of their abilities in whatever fashion. We're not in the Wild Wild West. I can't just run down the street, put a stake in the sand, start homesteading. It's not that way anymore. The world is different. So we don't have the ability to just sort of forage on our own, not like maybe you did 200, 300, 400, 500 years ago, maybe even before that. I look at like we are in a confined environment to a degree. We are in societies, and we have to find a way to make those societies efficient, which we have never tried to do because central planning and ideas that provide that kind of efficiency are so frowned upon. But I genuinely believe it's going to take something like that for us to not only get past the event horizon, if we haven't already passed it, but also to be able to build those kind of sustainable communities and build a sustainable society. And like I said, I'm yearning for the Star Trek world.
So just to interrupt the conversation, because this is really great and insightful. Everybody, we actually have Steve Grumbine's crew paired with the chat right now. So we've got two crews coming together. It's a great chat. Let's see if I can just kind of change this, because I like doing the finger pointing thing. This is great. We love you all. We love that you're tuning in, you're listening, you're spreading the message out to the masses. We really appreciate that. So if you're on Real Progressives, hit the like button. If you're on Prof. Steve Keen, hit the like button, subscribe. If you're watching on Twitter, hit the retweet button. We're going to do an after show. The two Steves may stay for a few minutes after. They may go. I'll be premiering a new system dynamic model that I've just completed. So make sure you stick with us, and I'm going to let the professionals keep talking.
Ty, do you want me to stay?
I was going to say, hold on, where do I?
No, hold on. So
all we got is Steve's left. He's just there by himself. Stephen
we
T.
we have an organization here, not quite as big as Real Progressives. It's essentially Dan and Ty. So I promoted Dan yesterday to lead scheduler.
Oh,
So
shit.
we send out messages weeks in advance, just
Yeah.
showing how you log on, etc. And the most important factor in these email calendar messages
You got to get the date right.
You've got to get the date.
Get the month right.
And get the month, at least be in the right month.
I got the right year.
Well, there you go. Star date.
So Daniel, I've had to demote you to kind of the guy that gets the coffee in that department now. And as for the terminology professional, I think that's subjective in any realm of conversation. So you are, of course, welcome to stay, my friend.
On that front, Steve, have you seen any of Ty's models?
I have. In fact, I mean,
Yeah.
He is such a self-deprecating dude. He never even acknowledged the fact that he was once a superstar of macro and cheese as well. I mean, he was a guest. So, and now he vanishes as soon as we make him a star. Look at see how he hides. But yes, I mean, Ty
had
is,
a fairly meteoric rise, but well deserved because the work he's doing with Minsky is absolutely first class.
Absolutely.
Yes. I regard him as the best Minsky modeler on the planet right now. I have two potential.
Just when my head was about to explode, he disappears. You know, this guy is my like number one mentor, right? So what he's saying in that moment is making my heart flutter a little bit, because when you get a comment like that, geez, like what can you say, right? But then he disappears. The internet gods are frowning upon Steve and I, and he is back. Nope, no feed. Here we go. He's back.
Oh, I hate this internet. I'm going to have to find somebody else's. I've got Carbon Tracker that I can go and use their offices on a Thursday for the lectures I'm giving it up to that stevekeenfree.com link. But here I'm going to have to find something else because, you know, this bloody thing is useless. The one over there is moderately useless. The really useless one is the one in the building. This is Michael Hudson's flat, by the way. Oh my God. It's I think it's the actual outside 4G network, which is so shithouse. And of course, I can't do that without leaving London. I'm actually considering getting hold of Elon Musk's Starlink and whacking a satellite dish outside the window, so I've got some chance of picking up a signal. I'll probably give it a try.
So where were we? Were we talking about Star Trek? Or were we talking about austerity? Let's spin the wheel. Where do you guys want to land? What do you want to talk about?
I think the austerity.
Go ahead.
I'll talk a quick Star Trek.
If you don't mind, just real quick, I want to answer the bit of the question though. To me, austerity is a different austerity than what you were talking about. Steve Keen got it right. To me, the idea here is that there are people in general just think people don't deserve anything. They don't deserve to live. Their framework is such that they preach pinching pennies. And I did something very unwise. I read Clara Mattei's book, The Capital Order, and I haven't been able to unlodge what I learned in that since. And just understanding the kind of triune approach to austerity that was baked in back at, right at the turn of the Bolshevik Revolution, the very, very visceral reaction capital had to seeing, oh my God, workers, oh my God, what are we going to do? And, the monetary austerity, the fiscal austerity, and then the threat of the sack, as they say, right? So it's like a three-way play, interest rates, cutting spending, and then letting you be at risk of losing your job. And that's how they discipline labor. And I've kept that Trinity model in my brain and I can't shake it. And so whenever I see aspects of that Trinity model jumping out and realize, well, wait a minute, why didn't they opt for price controls? Why did they opt to discipline me? Why do they continue to discipline on this side of the ledger, but not that side of the ledger? They starve the regulators and the people that need them. And they allow the ne'er-do-goods to fly crazy and just do whatever they want. And, it doesn't take much to see the hockey stick of the society in the US to realize how horrible inequality has grown since the 70s. And it's all been since Jimmy Carter and his austerity message and tightening your belt and eating your peas and everything else, while capital just went rampant and ran amok. So I want to flip that. I want to flip that around. And that's only going to happen in my mind with government spending and taxing wealth out of the economy.
This is actually an interesting point about the politics of MMT as well, because I got criticized a couple of days ago. I'm always getting criticized, but this particular one was amusing, saying that I'm trying to bring in communism, collapse capitalism. And I say, no, you lot are going to collapse capitalism. I'm trying to stop it. But the reality is what you're doing is going to destroy capitalism, because we'll have to have a war economy to survive what we're going to go through in climate change. But that was sort of saying I had a naive view of the government. And what, again, MMT gets accused of the same. If the government knew how money was created, the government would be much more reasonable. But of course, there's a large part of the government which, to echo Marx, is the managing committee of the ruling class. And a large part of that is keeping workers in their place. And you can keep workers in their place by making them afraid of losing their job. And they won't be afraid of losing their job if they've got decent health care and decent social security and so on. So even though I don't believe that's why they have the attitudes they do, I do believe it's because they don't understand the monetary system. Even if they did, they might use that to enforce, many more national guards to put down striking workers, et cetera, et cetera. The budgeting would... They go to a budget deficit to finance means of oppression rather than means of enlightenment. And this is the problem we have. It isn't we've got to both say this is how the system actually works, which is a large part of what MMT is about. And then this is how the system could be used once we know how it works. And that gets you into the politics.
That's it. Yep. Well stated. Well stated. Absolutely. I don't know if you're familiar with what's happening in Palestine, Ohio right now. But you see the
FEMA, God, yeah.
They're going, a train derailed with chemicals in Palestine, Ohio. Pete Buttigieg, who is our transportation secretary, didn't say anything about it for 10 days. Just God. Whatever, right? Joe Biden didn't say anything about it. Flies off to Ukraine in the middle of the night to Kiev, and basically offers them billions and billions and billions in aid, while simultaneously FEMA isn't helping the local communities. FEMA is there helping the workers from the trains. Norfolk Southern and the rest of them, these guys have committed the libertarian thing of cutting safety to maximize profit. And maximizing profit caused a train derailment. And it had the hand and glove of the Trump administration removing the protections that were put in there to create the braking regulations and to ensure the very things that would have stopped something like this from happening, repealed those things. So this is where the focus lies. They focus on ensuring capital is taken care of, that big business is taken care of, but that we the people are just an appendage to that. We'll take whatever the corporate masters give us. And so in that space, you see this happening everywhere. I mean, endless amounts of money for the military, endless amounts of money for incursions, zero money for improving schools, zero money for ensuring healthcare. So that mental space right there is, in my opinion, a disease of neoliberal thinking. And it's my enemy. It's what I fight against every day.
Well, you brought neoliberal in at the end, so I was following you 100%. But I'm making the connection, maybe incorrectly, that neoliberalism, and the audience too, that neoliberalism is a byproduct of a liberal ideology. Is that not the case?
Neoliberalism is the extreme pursuit of privatization. It is the diminishing of the public space and the maximizing of the private space. It's the minimization of public ownership and the maximization of the great man theory. It is the pinnacle, in my opinion, of everything Ayn Rand wanted, Ayn Rand believed in, the makers and takers. And you see these extremely wealthy men like Jeff Bezos and Gates and, the laundry list of the billionaires, right? And they believe that this is the right way to do it. They believe those men are required to do great things. You must have an Elon Musk, or there is no benefit. And I oftentimes go back and say, well, wait a minute, who created DARPANet? Who created, I mean, you go through it and you realize that public purpose spending has done more for society, but the powers that be hand that over to industry. Instead of letting it be for everyone's benefit, they hand it over to someone to create a new market, to create jobs, to create some radical thing that benefits a very select few. And so neoliberalism is what my current president is really all about. His whole career, you can look at 50 years of tape to see this is what his whole entire life has been about. And you see this has been going on really since Jimmy Carter. Ronald Reagan obviously put steroids on it. And it's just gone haywire since. And I guess each country who has gotten the opportunity to be a net importer of US neoliberalism has gotten to experience a little bit. I see it happening in Australia now. I see it definitely happening in the UK as the NHS is under siege constantly. You can see this in the EU and the way that the European Union was structured originally. You can see this through the IMF. You can see it through structural adjustments to the global south. Neoliberalism reigns supreme in these arrangements of government enables private sector becomes the gods of industry. The federal government does all it can to help them with the war machine, clearing markets, you name it. It's a very, very ugly scenario that's got to be put to death, quite frankly. I don't see any way that it can coexist with a society that's trying to survive climate crisis. Let's get back to that. So
getting back to climate crisis. Yeah. I mean, this is going to bring in both of those points, because a conservative position is going to say that neoliberalism is embodied and represented through a globalism and a move away from nationalism. So I get your point about a libertarianism kind of baked into the cake, so to speak, but it doesn't seem to be that. Or the conservative critique is actually going to be one that says we don't sign up for this global equity cause sort of thing, right? And it's going to take money away from the individual, right? It's going to take away from the average worker. Where in fact the Democrats going to say no, come on, man, can't you understand this? This is going to be better for you. You're voting for you've got a subtle form of the prisoners or not the prisoner's dilemma, but the one where you like your captor, right?
Stockholm syndrome.
Stockholm syndrome, right? Like, don't you realize that you're a conservative, but like your life sucks. If you would come over to the left and advocate for more for the average bloke, then you're gonna be better off. So it's like kind of like a no-brainer there.
Right.
But anyways, back to the point. Steve, I wanted to ask you about like the globalism push. Like you've baked libertarianism into the cake, so to speak. But you get my point about globalism?
Yeah, you got to realize that corporations have become supranational. I mean, they're beyond the domestic footprint, right? And they behave on a global scale. And they have global control. One of the hardest things to accept is that in the wake of getting rid of quote unquote chattel slavery, we had to find a way to build that production back into society at the lowest cost possible. And so the United States, through its arm of the IMF and through all sorts of other coups that they have led, using their CIA and so forth, have basically turned the global south into an open air plantation that they control through debt peonage and so forth. So a lot of the things that conservatives value come in through cheap imports, through not understanding the relationship of how those cheap imports came to be. And the real conservative push, if you ask me, is that suddenly the good news is we got to bring that production home. And now you're dealing with very real hard resource constraints. You're dealing with, hey, we don't want to tear that mountain up. We don't want to destroy that forest. We don't want to destroy and pollute that river. as long as it's being done somewhere else, it's out of sight, out of mind. You don't even care about the carnage of the environment. But when you see that I have to destroy this public park so I can get some lithium out of it, right? It's going to fundamentally change the battleground. It's going to change that political conversation. And now all of a sudden people are going to have something to say. I don't want you mining in my backyard. I don't want you fracking in my backyard. I don't want your fracking runoff to pollute my drinking water anymore. So I believe that in some respects, taking an ownership of how neoliberalism has empowered corporate rule really to building these markets. I mean, I think that that is probably the biggest wake-up call any former conservative can have, is recognizing the high cost of low prices and realizing how they come to be, and realizing that by creating these vassal territories, these slave territories, if you will, we've convinced Africa that they're a poor nation by extracting everything of value under their soil. And reality is Africa's a very wealthy nation. It's just being picked apart by groups around the world that have kept them in a neo-colonial state. And so in order to decarbonize, as Fadl Kaboub says, we got to decolonize. And I think a lot of what we're seeing right now is a result of the world pushing back from U.S. Practices that enslaved them through the payment system, SWIFT system, and through the arrangements of structural adjustments through the IMF. So I mean, to me, it's probably the number one paradigm we've got to alter in order to affect climate crisis.
So has Steve disappeared? So my next question was actually for Steve Keen, is how did Steve hook up with Steve originally? Where was that connection? So I'm going to let Steve Grumbine, there's these Steves, that's a lot of Steves. I'll let you answer the question first. How did you two first connect? Where did that start?
It was like 2017 timeframe. I hosted a debate with Warren Mosler and Steve Keen, and it's both beautiful in a way and it's horrible in a way, because Warren had maybe the worst possible internet known to mankind, maybe next to Steve Keen's here today. but he had a horrible internet connection, and he would drop from the interview and Steve would be talking, and then Warren would come back and just start talking, and there was like a real weird crossover effect, and somebody went out there and did God's work and kind of cleaned up the audio and tried to fix it up. But that was my first real time getting to know Steve. And I did not know almost any of what I know today. I was very, very, I was just getting to the point where I realized what a dollar was, that it was a unit of account, that it wasn't some, I know this sounds crazy, but it's the many, many steps your brain has to take to get to where the framing fits for you, that you start thinking differently. And I was at that point where I was starting to really think differently. It wasn't just words. They were starting to become analytical tools for me to see the world when I read the newspaper and whatever. So that was my first go with Steve. And, obviously I'm a MMTer, right? So I come from Warren Mosler's world. And the two of them battled like warriors. I mean, it wasn't like it wasn't gentle. And I'm like, what did I just step in? I didn't know any of the battle lines. I didn't know any of the stuff, man. I was just like, holy cowabunga, this is insane. And obviously you've seen there's still divides. We still got the issue of balance of payments. We still got the issue of our imports, a benefit or export, whatever. And then we've got some other things too, like the function of the consolidated Federal Reserve / Treasury versus no, they're separate and whatever, right? For me, what brought me back into Steve's world is that I recognize beyond the shadow of a doubt that for the types of things I want to see happen in this world, MMT on its own, it doesn't have a big enough reach. It has a lot of reach. It's growing exponentially. You're creating new MMTers every day. But I see guys like Keen and Hudson with the geopolitical angle, with an understanding of more of a global perspective. I mean, they're both global. They both address, gosh, I talk to people all over the world in MMT. So it's not, so it's like, gosh, why are we not best friends? Why aren't we hanging out? Why aren't we doing, whatever? And so for me, it became really important that, I mean, I reached out to guys like Mark Blythe, who are clearly adjacent, but they're not MMT. And, Steve and I hit it off. I interviewed him, gosh, a while back, and the first thing he was like, yeah, absolutely. And from that point on, we have a lot in common. We just a lot of things in common. And we struck up a friendship beyond just the economics of it all. And I don't want to get into everything, but just suffice it to say, it's nice to know that I have a friend in Steve. And that's kind of how it's gone.
So, Steve Keen, I just asked Steve Grumbine, how did you guys first connect? And obviously, there was the debate with you and Warren Mosler. I don't want to go down that track of division, but I want to talk like, what was your feelings of, how did that connect? Your first Macro and Cheese podcast. Tell me about that, how you first linked up.
Well, I think actually Steve got in touch and asked me on. And I think the thing which makes it easy for me and Steve to relate to each other is that we have, I had a similar background. I began with a right-wing perspective, and back when I was 17, I might add. But yeah, I swallowed you've got a friend in Steve. I swallowed the right-wing pill of neoclassical economics, and then I had the epiphany that it didn't make sense, so that it was internally inconsistent. So I understand the right-wing mindset, and I understand actually the need for a belief system as well, and understand the politics of all this stuff. Whether I'm right or wrong in the politics is another story, but I know there's politics in it. Now, there's an extent to which, I won't go naming names, but there's some parts of the MMT that sort of ignore the politics or, don't really engage with other elements apart from the strict MMT message. And you have to, I think, be broader than that. MMT is incredibly important, and getting it right would make a huge difference to how we understand the economy. But it wouldn't get rid of, people using government money creation for right-wing purposes, for example. So it clears the ground, but it clears the ground for another battle over how do we actually use this power. And I think that Steve and I, both having had a background to some extent in a right-wing perspective, gave us capacity to communicate with each other rather better than, not all by any means. Like I think Stephanie Kelton, I get him famously with Stephanie. She's a great person I want to see on this show. So it's not, I'm not putting a general thing about MMT, but there are elements which are a bit, let's say, a bit too dogmatic for my liking.
That was very, very diplomatic. So I have that on Twitter. I sometimes have a problem with being diplomatic. So
so do I.
I got. Oh yes. So normally Steve's not like that, but before we jumped on, let me.
No. Hold on. Let me dial it back just to keep on the MMT track. I like what Bill Mitchell says to kind of highlight what Steve just said. Is MMT is essential, but it's not everything, right? There are other parts, but I think like people like Stephanie Kelton have highlighted quite eloquently that MMT is the framework, but there are things on the outside of it that we need to explore at the same time. So I just want to kind of adjunct to what Steve just said there. Like essentially MMT is correct. We need that framework in economics. Some of the vernacular, I think like everything in life, there's disagreements, and hopefully we can all kind of come together and find a common framework on the language. Dan, what were you going to say?
Well, I'm going to switch to the thread and stay on MMT, right? I mean, I think it has much more of a possibility to be a huge fix, a very transformative piece if the psychology across markets no longer viewed government spending as the same model as household spending, right? Basically, that's the message of Kelton's book. But I see the reality is that you have politicians on the other side that are saying, it's this party's fault for inflation. And we're not there yet. That's an advanced university course, MMT is. And yet we're not out of grade school when it comes to economic theory for an average person. That's my concern.
Let's I'm just going to switch into the after show. Steve and Steve, please stay for about 5 minutes, 10 minutes longer, just so I can keep the conversation with
Sure.
you guys going on MMT. Guys watching the show, we're just going to do a little cut transition. I explained this last week. We're doing this for posterity in case we want to separate the shows in the future. So stay with us. We'll be right back. And we did it again. Now, as I said, our last show was canceled after you appeared on it. So fingers crossed the executives don't do that again.
The more I read in the neoclassical thing, the more I just, I'm scratching my eyeballs out all the time.
The voice of God in the background.
Oh, geez. Once the coins get warm enough because of your body temperature in the winter, it actually keeps you moderate beer drinking in the evenings. Well, that's inspiring for a Saturday morning. We're still friends and we're still here. I'm sorry, guys. So what I do is I like the Macro and Cheese podcast, and we have a very jazzy intro on our show.
I love it.
And so I wanted to I steal a lot of my ideas from the Macro and Cheese progression of promoting each show, doing a tweet 2 days ahead, doing those audiograms. And it's not to take anything away from Macro and Cheese. It's just a great formula that Steve Grumbine has really fostered over the years. So I wanted an intro and team. And I wanted an intro that was a little hard, like Macro and Cheese, like, yeah, we're here, yeah. So that is my attempt at doing that. So let's carry on the conversation about MMT with the two Steves. Daniel, kind of lead it off what you were asking there. And I'm going to bring up my new model and kind of display that as we kind of go along. We'll do it organically, and then we'll all just disappear into nothingness when we're done.
Yeah, look, and I was kind of leading I was looking for a particular kind of answer from an appeasing answer, like how do we convert the masses sort of answer. And I want to preface that with, I think there's a strong acknowledgement that any big advancement in history with, like, say, for example, MMT, this is what we're talking about. Let's treat it like a scientific discovery, which, could be a separate debate. But it's not up to the scientists to go out and do the PR campaign. It's a big bomb. It's going to mean transformation of society. It's enormous. So it's not up for us to do anything but explain the truth in the most direct way possible. And then it's up for the rest of society to come along. Is that kind of how you would answer? Either Steve, go ahead.
Well, let me just say this. Stephanie Kelton's book, The Deficit Myth, came on the heels of Warren Mosler's 7 Deadly Innocent Frauds, Randall Wray's The MMT Primer. Each of these bodies of knowledge were more wonky in the beginning, and they eventually got to where it was an airport toilet read. I mean, just being silly, but you get the point. It's like anybody can pick up The Deficit Myth, and it just reads like a novel. It doesn't read like oh my God, how do I figure out that formula? And I think most people don't want to deal with economics because they don't have any interest in learning the formula. They don't want to know any of that. So Stephanie's book brought about a way of painting out that, hey, guys, when they talk about reducing the deficit, they're talking about this side of the ledger. When they reduce the deficit, reduce money from your pocket. And so once you start touching people where it matters, getting them about the things that matter, like inflation. See, we had our act together, I think, message-wise, with the concept of the deficit myth. There was not the same unification of raw and gray, just eloquently said this on one of my podcasts recently. He said, MMT didn't have their act together when it came to the unified response from everyone on inflation. I mean, all of us can say it, all of us can give you it, but some can give it to you in under 60 seconds, and others require 20 minutes to get to the punchline. Nobody's going to listen to you for 20 minutes. You got to be able to get that thing off a bumper sticker. You're in a TikTok culture.
Yeah, but are we coming back to a PR, right? Are we coming back to a PR?
It is
strategy now, right?
It is PR.
Yeah.
But see, you can't, one size fits all won't work. If you are somebody who gets their fingernails did and you go out to 5-star meals and stuff like that, you have a different conversation with your friends. It's a totally different conversation you're going to have than somebody who's sitting there ready to slice their wrists, or in a rehab somewhere, or is homeless, or maybe lost a job, lost a family, trying to figure out how to make ends meet. And they're looking at the world and they're saying, hey, it ain't working out for me. How can I make this work out for me? So very different conversations depending upon who you're talking to. And one of the things that really shook me was listening to African Americans at the third MMT conference, where they brought a lot of different groups together that were of interdisciplinary backgrounds. And they were explaining why. For example, we just did one on FDR today, but FDR was not for everybody. Black people did not win under FDR. Japanese were interned under FDR. So you've got to be able to reach them where they are. And so the concept of power dynamics really impact Black and brown people. And so when you're talking to them like, oh yeah, we could just do this thing, they're laughing at you like, hey, I've never seen them do anything. I'm still waiting for my 40 acres and a mule. So you need to understand where it's coming from to get to them. So each group, each issue has its own set of rules and landmines that you've got to navigate to get people to enter into and embrace this new knowledge. And unfortunately, there is no silver bullet.
I can see by the background here that we probably either got Steve primed to do some conversation, or even a Ty in the background, but we got a model up here. Before we move on to that, I just had as a philosopher, I had a question for you, Steve, about Foucault. Did anything that you just mentioned about power and the study of power, do you have any background in studying that particular philosopher, Foucault?
I know the name, and I think it's Foucault or something like that. Am I close?
Yeah, I'll post
Foucault. I've forgotten the full pronunciation.
I'm familiar, but I would not say that is someone whom I've studied. But I guarantee you, if you suggest it, I will.
No, that's I don't really suggest it. I would say go to Plato. But
the cave, allegory of the cave, is another aspect.
Yes. Okay, yeah. Let's look at the numbers. Let's look at the numbers. This will be our way to get out of the cave here. Who's narrating this one? Because it's not going to be me.
This is Ty. So talk us through, Ty.
So Daniel, I'm going to promote you to head producer. Can we remove the screens of each participant but keep their mic on? So I've got
everybody just click the like I'm doing right now. I'm going to click press V and disable my camera.
Okay, and also I just Steve Grumbine has to take off his time. I'm just going to actually bring him back on here before I show the model. Steve, it was I'm glad you came on. I've kind of wanted to do this since I kind of started this podcast with Steve. So this has been great because you brought all of your viewers in. Mr. Keen, I showed a graph earlier of our users growing over the last month. It's going to spike. Right. It's going to, again, I used Ravel, by the way, which is the commercial version of Minsky. It's going to spike next week. So the Steve Grumbine show is going to be our gold standard now that we're going to have to beat in all the following weeks. So I don't know if I should, create some sort of statistical averaging now to kind of bump that down somehow. But anyways, like I just want to say, really appreciate it. You're a really insightful guy. Episode 201 of Macro and Cheese, I think, is the gold standard for macro and cheese.
It is indeed. It's the fiat standard.
Oh yeah.
Okay, that's definitely the touche for the day. Okay.
Yes, that was a good one.
So, anyways, we're really glad you came on. We'll do this again. I'm sure you're going to have Steve on Macro and Cheese in the future, so we'll look forward to that. You can find all of Steve Grumbine's work at realprogressives.org. Check it out. Listen to his podcast, Macro and Cheese. My favorite current podcast right now going on the internet. Interesting stuff.
Thank you so much, guys. And Steve, it's so good to see you again. It's so nice to meet Daniel, and just want to thank you guys for having me on. This was a really blessed moment for me. I'm really proud to have been here. So thank you guys for having me on.
Thank you.
See you later.
Thank you.
See ya. Well, Daniel, come back on since we're doing the after show here. That was great. I love Steve. He's a few weeks ago, when I made my controversial kind of tweet, I got some blowback. But the first person to reach out to me and DM me and say, "Hey, how you doing? Is everything okay?" Was Steve Grumbine, right?
Yeah, he's a very emotional guy.
He is a very passionate MMTer, but he was able to sit and look at my tweet objectively to see what I was doing, and he was the first person to say, "Hey, I get what you're saying. I don't agree with the way you framed it, but how you doing? Because I'm seeing you battling in the tweets." So he's got a huge heart, and like Steve is doing right now, like Daniel's doing right now, like what I'm doing right now. We're just kind of doing this on our own spare time. That's what he's doing, trying to promote the great work of the Steve Keens, the Stephanie Keltons, all the great heterodox economists, underground physicists he's had on his show, right? So just a guy with a really big heart. I'm glad we had him on.
Yeah.
I will show this model for anybody that's interested. I obviously practice system dynamics. I managed to replicate the urban dynamics model by Jay Forrester. It was created in the late 60s. I wanted to put it in Minsky because I want everybody to know how powerful Minsky is. It can be used for almost everything. I'm calling this Urban Dynamics 2.0 because I made a lot of adjustments to it to better reflect our inner city dynamics currently in the 21st century. This model is also a submodel of a rather larger 3.0 model I'm doing for BD Consulting. So I actually wanted to replicate this model for two reasons. One, to show that it can be done in Minsky, and two, I'm going to be using it in some consulting projects where essentially I can plug in. We'll bring up an example. If we're working with a municipality, they have a new transportation project, I can model the transportation model separately and then actually plug it into this model and show the entire dynamics of the city. So a lot of things in system dynamics is looking at what your feedbacks are. There's a lot of linear thinking, let's say, in economics. You've got A and B influences A. So if you think you're going to increase B, then A should go up. That's linear thinking. But really, B has a bunch of feedback effects into C, D, E, F. And that's what system dynamics is about. It's exploring those dynamics. So you start to realize that there is not that linear, easy thinking behavior that's happening. There's an entire system going on in the background that happens endogenously that's going to ultimately affect what A does. And it might not be so intuitive as that linear thinking. I'm not going to run the model. I just really wanted to kind of bolster here, maybe go through some of the graphs. I basically, in this model, utilized every tool in Minsky I could possibly use. Within these groupings here. I will see if I can right click here and zoom to the canvas. It is a massive model, and we're still, that one's not so massive, but let's see what this is. Okay, that's not a massive one. Back to master group. Let's labor dynamics. Let's go to that one. So if we go in, this is the first time I've utilized this kind of technique to this degree to really shrink down a lot of information that's not really good for presentation purposes. Open in Canvas. This is a beta version I'm running of Minsky right now, so it should have popped up. But really within this model, I've got, I think I counted, it was 475 separate equations that run in the background of this model. So the grouping method it had two purposes in Minsky. One, to have subroutines. So if you create it maybe an exponential function, you have a bunch of A, B, C, and D parameters. You could hide those parameters because it wasn't giving you any valuable information on the feedback effect of the model. And then you could use those parameter names. You could duplicate them in other spots in your model and just kind of keep it out of the way. The other reason was to hide clutter. And that's what I've done here. Of all these background equations, I've just kind of hidden in the background to keep the actual model, the interface, very clean. I'll go back to it. So you're seeing the flow dynamics, so the stock flow dynamics, but not all that spaghetti diagram stuff right on the canvas. So it's very easy to read, right? You have a flow of bursts, underemployed arrivals going into your underemployed stock, flows going to the labor stock, flows going to the manager professional stock. It's kind of, I would say, the largest model I've done in Minsky so far. And I wanted to show it off because it just proves that Minsky is now at a state where it can be used at the upper echelon of modeling. It competes just fine with software packages like Vincem and Stella, and to a large degree, Simulink. And just to kind of highlight where Minsky sits, in my opinion, and Steve Keen might disagree, it kind of sits in between Vincem and Simulink, where Simulink is very engineer orientated. Vincem is used heavily in the social sciences. I find the Minsky interface kind of sits right in between those two packages. And that's just the way I feel about it. I don't know if that's done by design. Maybe we could ask Steve, was that done by design?
Yes, it was. I mean, I started from the engineering side because the first package I became aware of was Simulink, and I didn't like it. This is Simulink that is a product of MATLAB, and it's flowchart dynamics for engineers, and it's used very heavily to design circuit boards, logic flows, hardware. You'll design in Simulink before you put it into a physical form. I know, for example, that I work with Trond Andresen, who is teaches first-year systems engineering at the Norwegian University of Technology in Trondheim, Norway, and most of their students go out and design ships. Okay, so you do a design in silicon first of all, the control system, so that the boat won't smash into the harbour when you bring the boat next to the dock. Because if you know your wave stroke shapes, what actually happens, there's only a small number of waves that can form next to the ship, next to the dock. There's lots of waves that can form outside. So the pressure actually is going to push the boat against the dock, unless you design servos that can feel that happening and then put thrust in the opposite direction, et cetera, et cetera. But it's very engineering based, and it has a whole lot of weaknesses that I didn't like. So I discovered a program called VisSim, which was beautiful. But VisSim didn't manage to beat MATLAB in the market, and it's now been reduced in scope to be mainly being a transportation modeling system. And then I saw Stellar and all that other stuff, and I just didn't like the front end. I thought Stellar was quite clunky, and it still looks very clunky 30 years after it was first designed, or 40 years after. So I wanted to bring out the clean design of VisSim, which is similar to MATLAB in various ways, but oriented towards social sciences as well. And of course, the Godley table is absolutely unique. There's nothing like that in any other program. So it's not on that spectrum. It's outside it, and I would hope to be above it. And but I still know there's lots of things we haven't actually built yet. So, for example, one thing, as you know, is in Simulink, in VenSim and Stellar, is you can actually show whether a positive feedback loop is positive or reinforcing or dampening. And I want to add facilities to Minsky, but the thing is, I've got 1.5 programmers now building Minsky and Ravel, and no, we don't, because it's for open source. What open source means is you don't sell it, so you don't make any money, so you don't get any money to develop it, which is a real problem. So I'm sure the total funding for Minsky will be less than $500,000, but I think it compares very well to programs like Simulink, which must have hundreds of millions have gone into it, and Stellar, which has certainly got tens of millions, largely because I'm working with one of the world's great programmers, with Russell Standish, who truly, is just a remarkable knowledge of programming.
We're gonna get Russell. We're gonna get Russell on the show eventually.
That's a good idea.
The issue is our time right now for Australia is absolutely shitty for him. So I don't think he's that early of a riser. So we may
trust me, he's not. I've woken up at 9 o'clock in the morning one day.
So what we may do in that situation, if you're still in Europe, is we might just do a special time for him, because I think it's
a good idea.
It's absolutely important that we get him on, because he is one of the other connections between me and you, Steve. Without him and all the work, we're not having this conversation now. So I think that's very important we get him on.
Yeah. So I have a question about that reinforcing dampening thing. What does it look like in the interface to reinforce or dampen a stock and flow chart? I'm visually. How would you describe a visual?
Well, what you get, like if you have population growth leads to pressure on resources, leads to reduced population growth. That's a negative feedback. It's called negative. And what you then get is a loop. And you can say, is this loop amplifying or dampening a process? And you may well find you're designing something where your intention is to dampen a process. And in fact, the way you put it together, it actually amplify. So the classic there was the Homer Bridge disaster, where the bridge was unfortunately designed in such a way that the bridge itself amplified the feedback of the winds, which meant the bridge collapsed quite dramatically. So you need to show what the feedbacks are amplifying or dampening, and is that a Stellar model? That's a VenSim.
Yeah,
the VenSim model that Charles brought up now.
Yeah, so I just wanted to show Daniel that's kind of what it would visually look like. And actually, one idea I'd like Minsky to steal to address those feedback loops is they have a thing called use trees and causes trees that actually makes a tree. So instead of, I don't know if you guys can see that on the screen or not. Yeah. So this is very basic. Like I can click on a variable and then it creates a tree that follows it backwards or the other way. And I think that'd be very easy to implement in Minsky versus trying to have a Phillips type diagram, which is a whole shitload of work for Russell that may be years off into the future. So I thought, well, geez, maybe these use trees that are text-based, that have simple lines going between them, you can click on a variable and it would trace the tree back so you could see the feedback loops. Just an idea.
We could add that. We could add that as a tool chip, quite possibly. Click on a variable, and one of the options is show antecedents and precedents of this model, and then you'd be able to show what that's that sort of thing. Yeah, there you go. Okay.
but more than a tooltip, because I imagine as a little pop-up window, you can copy that and stuff. A tooltip, it's hard to get that information.
Yeah, I know Russell and probably Steve are very hesitant on creating more and more pop-ups. We have Minsky where it's all right on the canvas, but yeah, it could be a pop-up, something that you could export, a latex export, or an SVG export, or a PDF export. But I think that might be the easiest way to really address visualizing feedbacks in Minsky without going to the next extreme, which is creating a fill-ups or a Forster type diagram, which is outside of it. Minsky wasn't designed that way, and I like the way the Minsky interface is, where it's a cobwebs or spider webs versus spaghetti diagram.
Yeah, spaghetti diagrams, think are deadly. You can't read them. And you've done a beautiful job of using the cobwebs as an illustrative and explanatory tool. And that's a major important thing for me within modeling, is that modeling a particularly complex system, you're modeling it because you want people who don't understand complexity to understand how the model works. Now, if the interface itself is so complicated you can't read it, that's self-defeating. And that's the case, I think, with stellar models and so on. You would have seen I've forgotten whose model it was, but somebody did a model of the Afghanistan conflict. And it was one of the classic spaghetti diagram. And it was shown to a general in the Pentagon. And I think it was a recorded seminar. And he said, once we understand that diagram, winning the battle in Afghanistan will be easy. Well, of course, neither happened, obviously. So you want to have a clarity in the model design itself. And Minsky was designed with that intention in mind. And Ty, you've done by far the easiest models to understand. The clarity comes through in the way you use the tool. And so, like the Godly tables themselves, you look at it and you can say, oh, that line makes sense, that line makes sense, that line makes sense. Get down to the bottom, it all makes sense. Therefore, you agree it's actually an accurate model. And that's a huge advantage over a stellar model where you see this bowl of spaghetti and think, oh, God, I prefer lasagna.
Yeah, so if anybody's actually interested in what Steve just said, if you check out at Ty Keenes on my YouTube channel and look at the video Minsky versus Vinsim. And I'm not knocking Vinsim, but what I do is I compare a Godly table in Minsky to what it would look like on the Vinsim canvas, trying to interlock all these maybe I think it was 8 different accounts. And you start losing any conceptual information from looking at all these wires and pipes going together. And that's not to knock Vinsim. Vinsim has a place in system dynamics in some social sciences areas. It's a great program. If Tom Fitterman sees this episode, he's a big Vinsim user. I admire you. I'm not knocking Vinsim, but there are areas in Minsky with Minsky that are superior, and specifically that's modeling the financial aspects of the economy, whether in micro aspects, so a small business or a small industry, to the macro economy.
Yeah. Well, I've got to head off to dinner, guys. Having dinner with Adam Hardy, who runs the ecocore.org website, which is pushing the idea of a parallel currency for carbon credits as a way of restraining. Actually, I must get Adam on as well. I'll mention it to him tonight to come in and talk about that idea. So I've got to go. So great to see you. I've got to try to find a physical solution for my bloody internet hassles here in London. I'll be here for another 3 weeks. So
it actually was remarkably good considering what you're using. That you're clear all the way through, but then suddenly you drop off.
And drop out.
So,
yeah.
So
anyway, I'll drop out now by choice. So see you guys next week.
See you, Steve.
Okay, bye guys.
Bye.
Bye. We
are reaching our natural organic conclusion to the show. As I'm watching, we still got, what do we got on Twitter? We've got 10 people on Twitter, 38 people here, so we're still going. We're close to 50 viewers. But I want to take this time because I think it's very important to thank everybody that's joining in every week. What I'm thinking about in each episode is I'm going to compile a list of the top chatters, just as a recognize that you guys are making this right here. I love doing this. Perfect. You guys make the show, right? You really do. This is a live stream. Without you guys, it just wouldn't be half as fun. So just make sure you keep doing that.
Are you going to put their names in the ticker tape?
I'm going to. I could do that. But I was thinking actually making a custom graphic so I could address it in the start of the show, middle of the show. Really show like recognition to you guys that are. You're here every week. I recognize a lot of the names: Botch Mandela, Commie John, Web Freaks. Do we have Lana here? Is this the one and only? So if she, what a special week. Now this might have been because she saw Steve Grumbine's tweets, but she's a good friend. I wish we could have her on the show. She is a smart person. I see a lot of her tweets on Twitter. Very, very smart individual. But I'm seeing like a lot of just going through the chat. Wesley, where are we? He comes in every week. So I just want to make a list of these people that have great questions, have a great conversation going on. I think that's just really, really special. I will say Dan and I have a top secret plan for the show. I can't tell you what it is, but we do have a plan to take this show to the next level. And I'll leave it at that, to be continued. So yeah, Dan, what did you think about Steve Grumbine? This is the first time you met him. Be honest. We're on the after show. We're still friends. Give your honest opinion.
No, I want to tune into his show because, like I said, I find that I'm really in need of a coherent, good argument from the left, and it seems harder and harder to find for somebody like myself who's, wants to participate in the left. So I'm going to tune in. And then I also hope that it's a good destination for people who are maybe right of center, that are looking, for that alternative counterpoint, to their own positions and say, oh, maybe I should think about that a little bit differently. Okay. How do I really reconcile what he's saying? And I think we need more of that, right? We need more balanced opinions. And I think it's beyond, Nietzsche said, beyond good and evil. I said, it's beyond right and wrong, because I think, you can come to the conclusion about what's right and what's truthful and very quickly. Now, how do I convince my neighbor? That is an interesting thing. How do I convince my neighbor?
Yeah, he's my opinion of Steve Grumbine, when we're talking about, he at his heart, he does want to unify people. He can come off as quite confrontational, but I get that too, because I'm passionate about the things I believe in. But I would also like to see, because I see this like in the Twitter universe, a lot of my followers have disagreements with my other followers, and I'm thinking, oh, I wish I could just bring you guys together because you're all on the same page. It's, we want to help the common human being out there, all us workers, poor people. We would just want a better life and a cleaner planet, right? And if we could all just come together and unify, drop the vernacular differences, this world would be a better place. And that's what I know about Steve Grumbine. That is his underlying goal. The question is, does the confrontational way work? Is there a place for that? And I think there is with Steve Grumbine and his movement. I think there is a place for people like that, but I also think if we look at the other end of the spectrum, and we'll keep it in the MMT confines, you have people like Stephanie Kelton that are very inviting and understanding of other people's opinions, but knows how to address the way what her opinions are to be contrary, but still inviting to those other people. So everybody has a role to play, and I wish there could be some cohesion between all these people to really, like, foster, a better planet and a better life for the lower class people in the economic chain.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, especially as we head towards, metaphorical cliff, we have had unprecedented growth in human history. And if we have a decline, then that's going to take some thinking and planning, I think. I mean, I'm not saying that our growth didn't go without planning. It did. I mean, that's one of the things that somewhat defeats a completely libertarian stance. But planning for decline is different than planning for growth.
Yeah.
So, and if you have to have finger pointing on everything that that will unfold with history, then it's almost like what Steve said a while back, is that you almost have to get your hand burnt in order to know what not to do. The only problem with that is that there may be nothing after you burn your hand. That's the point I think Steve's trying to make. So if we the only option is to do something, and I'm referring on a broader conversation. I'm returning to a climate sort of situation. Right?
Sorry, I just want to let you go right back. Yes, Lana, we are following each other. I'm Ty Keynes on Twitter. It breaks my heart that you don't remember that, but yes, yes, we have interacted. You must be so famous on there that I'm just a little peon, Twitter peon. But yes, we do follow each other. I will shoot you a tweet after the show just so you remember who I am. Dan, what were you saying? Sorry, I cut you off. I shouldn't do that. I do that. I feel like I'm doing that a lot to Dan. And Dan is one of the greatest thinkers I know, that I personally know. He is an outside of the box thinker, and I gave him a hard time about the scheduling earlier. That's all just a fun ribbing between friends. Dan is a very, very smart individual, very passionate about the things he believes in. He runs a very cool media website. I will bring up the link. He is top notch. He is top barrel, top shelf.
Oh, come on. Okay, I got to cut you off. I got this mind of Homer in my. And normally I think about the Homeric epics, but now I've got Homer Simpson walking across my mind. SMRT. I am so smart. SMRT. So thanks for that, anyways, Ty. But yeah, I love the philosophy. And I love philosophy, not the philosophy. I love philosophy. And it's not always the case that when we really dig deep into economics that, sometimes I'm homeless in that conversation. But I love this crew nonetheless. And I know that more people should pay attention to economics because it's something that we seem to leave to our meritocracy. The experts know that. But
yes,
do they really know that? Do they really know economics?
I think that is the issue there, is right. We say, well, we leave it to the people that know best. And at best, the common person watches those people that know best on news outlets. And I'll drop the name Larry Summers. Like, oh my God. Like, oh my God. Oh. And the problem is on the heterodox side, even recently with Stephanie Kelton being on Bad Faith, which is becoming a fairly popular podcast. that doesn't get covered by the mainstream media, unfortunately. And it's, it's a dilemma. It's a dilemma that reality is not being shown as reality in our media. We are living in that time where our news is essentially propaganda. It has been for a long time, but it is essentially left and right propaganda. And we miss the key insights from the Stephanie Keltons, the Steve Keens, all the great individuals. There's a whole list of them. I can't even remember the Lanas from Twitter. The smart people that should be listened to don't get that mainstream attention.
Larry the Loser Summers, interesting. Ty, I don't know if you're up for it, but I've actually got a critique of us on this show that I'm trying to formulate. Okay,
There's
and so
a critique somebody else has made against us, or you're going to critique us?
I'm going to critique us.
Oh, Jesus. Don't we get enough of that?
No, but how do I take this Twitter thing down? I got to take that just so that for some reason I like it. Okay, it was a little bit distracting. Okay, Planks it. I got it. Okay, Lana Dell hates the clock. Okay, yeah, with an L. Okay. Okay, so basically the critique is in a meritocracy. So when Steve Grumbine came on the show, he basically said, you know what, the American public, and so this would be for people, there's similarities with this critique all over the world, but you have people who are not in power, say the liberals, they shout loud and they've got an ability to advocate for change and they want power. But when they get the power, then by Steve's own definition, he's saying they don't do the right things once they have the power. Okay. So now I want you to hold that and suspend that for a minute. And then I want you to think about meritocracy and say, okay, so we want to put the right people in power, right? To be able to execute and deliver on what is being promised. But time and time and time and time again, that proves not to be the case. So my critique is to say, how do you square that circle? How do you square that circle to advocate for a system that seems to be incapable of executing once they have power? That's my question. That's my critique.
That's a tough one. This is why I'll never be a politician. Can you frame that again for me? Your question within one paragraph.
Did I just monologue several paragraphs?
You did. So I want to answer your question, but I lost some of the beginning because I was listening to the later part, and I want to answer it because you put the word critique in there. And okay, well, it's on now. Critiquing. Oh.
Yeah, okay, let me ease into this one a little bit different. I know you've asked for something concise and short, but when somebody says echo chamber or echo chamber, what do they mean? It's usually a critique about somebody else, or you say, I don't want to be immersed in my own bias and no way out of that cave, right? Mm-hmm. So one of the ways that I've got an early detection system for something like that. We're all faulty to some degree of participating in echoes and being in echo chambers. So if you find yourself saying something that is, commonplace that people have said before or you've heard before, that should be an indication that you're participating in an echo chamber. Okay.
Echo chamber.
Or echo chamber. Right. Okay. And so where I challenge people to do is to break new ground and try and think of things in a different way. Okay. Try and introduce novelty into the thinking process to come at things from a different angle. Now that's very metaphorical or metaphysical, because there's no, vector of thought coming in on this, right? I mean, it's truly just imagination. But the critique that I lobbed at the group, and I'm putting everyone on the show into that situation. I think we're playfully but guilty by association here. So Steve Grumbine was on the show, and one of the first things he said is that the liberal or the democratic movement or position gets undermined by people not executing properly. So they're very passionate and loud and persuasive when they're not in power, but when they are in power, they don't do and deliver what they're supposed to. Okay, that sounds like a description of a politician, regardless of right or left. But my point is, if you take a meritocracy and you say we're going to put the right people in charge, okay, right? We're going to put the most qualified people in charge that we think will be able to execute on the plan that we have. Why is there continuing to be failure and letdown? Now, I didn't say left or right, but by Steve's definition today, coming into the show, he's acknowledging that the left is not executing on what they're promising to deliver, and this is undermining it. So my critique is that if we have all these great ideas of how to restructure society, provide a more just, equitable society for particularly the lower to middle class people, then what is the problem? Why can't we execute on it? And is it that's it? Why can't we execute on it?
My belief in this, I think, applies to both sides, and I saw it with Trump. Trump had a lot of grandiose plans, and I think he may even believed in them draining the swamp. But I imagine, and I haven't been in the position myself, when you finally get into that position of power, you realize there's a huge capitalistic system that will steamroll your ass in a second, no matter how big you are. Whether you're Barack Obama, Justin Trudeau, there is a system that you don't see until you're, and I can only speak hypothetically here and imagine myself running as a politician, then getting elected, and then realizing there is a machine at work that is blind to the left and blind to the right, and it's all about profits. It's all about the accumulation of wealth for people at the top, and it's a very powerful machine. So whatever ideals the left or the right come in to make the world a better place, they quickly run up against that capitalistic machine, and they either back down because that's politically safe, because they want to get reelected for a second term. They realize where the money's coming from, and they don't necessarily become corrupted, but they surrender. They surrender some of their own personal ideals, because they are recognizing that we have created a monster in capitalism, an absolute monster that is encompassed the globe, essentially. And that is a critique against capitalism from me. That is an ill of capitalism, that it is a system that creates its own endogenous nature that is profit driven, and that will steamroll some of the kindest, most inviting ideals that great people that have come up, whether you're on the right or on the left, and you have those people in your head right now, they ultimately get stifled by this capitalistic machine that is, it seems like at this point, it's going to be impossible to ever break away from.
Well, it's interesting how you pull it to capitalism, because I mean, even though we're good friends, I'm not as anti-capitalism as I think you are, and I don't know if at least in that statement, and I don't know if Steve is either, because like he goes, I'm not anti-capitalism. I'm just saying that we're ruining the system. We're eroding it so quickly that we don't have the safeguards in place. So I want to maybe roll it back a couple thousand years, and fundamentally markets are
A couple thousand years? Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, no, I mean the markets breed interaction between populations, right? So, markets, so we could say GDP, for example, it's not always producing a physical good. There's, like Steve Grumbine said, he goes, the bureaucracy is in of itself a contributor to GDP. And so you could look at reducing GDP just by stripping away the bureaucracy and the red tape within the healthcare system. Make it more efficient, right? Okay. And so I agree with that. I mean, you could have a marketplace of ideas where people's ideas got compensated for. That could be a theoretical structure to GDP, to gross domestic product. I mean, I'm always thinking, let's just wipe away GDP. Let's get rid of it. Like, we're still a production-centric society. How can we advocate for biodiversity when still the metric is production? Just in itself, very simple terms. GDP, it's a production metric. So we want prosperity, which means what? More production of something. Okay, is it ideas or is it extracting more materials from the planet? What is it? And at what expense? Where does Earth come into GDP? That doesn't seem to come into that equation. So here's one sort of soundbite that I would say. What if you rolled up your sleeves, and the liberals rolled up their sleeves and they said, you know what? This is the plan. Our next election, we're going to give every American, every Australian, every Canadian, nations around the world are going to earn an income, universal basic income, right? Okay. Now, whether you roll it out with something else, you say, here's the job, actually, because no one likes universal basic income. You say, okay, all right, how about here's the job. It's $60,000 a year. You sign up for it and you agree to this, 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 and this. If you don't want it, don't take the job. We're just playing by the same rules everybody else is doing. And it's open to every Canadian, every American, every Australian, every global citizen can go and sign up for a job like that. We say, how are we going to get shit done? I don't know. We're going to have to talk about it and work it out. And I think that that's something that would be funded by MMT.
So I want to dial it back here. I'm not saying capitalism on its face, the ideals of it, having markets where people can freely exchange what they create for units of money, on its face, that is freedom. I'm not advocating that should be taken away by any means. But what I am advocating is that capitalism has grown into its own, I'll use the word beast, and it has its own endogenous behavior where a collective of people and very rich people are together. And I don't think an individual rich person says, I'm going to go out and screw the poor person. I don't think all rich people have those ideals. I think there's a lot of rich people that understand, boy, I'm sure lucky. I'm going to donate. I'm going to look out for the poor. I'm going to try to use my wealth to help the poor. So I don't want to paint the picture that all wealthy people are evil. But what I'm trying to say is that capitalism is breeding its own endogenous behavior, that it's because of profits and it's profit driven collectively, it stifles the ideals of people. And we go back to what Grumby was saying, people coming up on the left being very loud and vocal what needs to be done. They get in the position of power and they realize there is this endogenous behavior that they didn't really appreciate. And I'm being speculative at this point because I'm not in that position. And that stifles their ideals and how they want to change the system. So I just want to dial it back. I am, in a lot of ways, I'm a socialist capitalist. Like we need government regulations. We need like in Canada, we have healthcare. I like that. I like the government creates money and puts it into healthcare and gives it to all of our provinces. So we have free, unlike down in the States. So it's not so easy to, when I make a statement against capitalism, that I'm broadly saying capitalism and the free markets don't work, because I'm not. There's too many gray areas. But just dialing it back to what Grumby was saying, I think that is really an essential problem, that there's a part of capitalism that is endogenous. It's happening within itself because of all the variables coming together. And that endogenous aspect is profit driven. And that profit driven aspect stifles the ideology of people coming up on the left. And I'll be fair and say there are people on the right that have compassionate feelings towards their fellow human beings, and even they get stifled when they come up. Whether you believe things on the right or not, there are people that live on the right that are compassionate human beings, but they're right leaning, and even they come up and they realize that profit driven machine stifles their ideals.
Yeah, profit driven. Okay, well, let me try and offer and let me massage this through in a way that says, let me try and offer a response to that I think would be an appropriate response. Okay, so the market, okay, charging money for something is the metric to determine whether or not something, how it scales and how it grows. Okay, so if you don't have that like direct feedback with money and profit motive, okay, for most of us in an entrepreneurial sort of mindset, yes, we're heavily geared towards profit because that means we're doing a good job. That means we're growing. That means the initiative is actually growing. Okay. If we don't have that metric, how do we know? Is it entirely our moral compass that is directing us in that direction? And I'm not saying that facetiously. I'm saying, really, is that what we should be moving by in our activities? 100% is our moral direction. So take profit out of the equation. Then what is it that you're actually? Is it just interest? Is it normative, which means values? What is it that is guiding that behavior? Is it morals?
The behavior that drives
without a profit motive.
Without a profit motive, what is capitalism? Is that what you're asking?
No, I mean an economic activity, and I mean more organic economic activity. Okay, so
okay, I got you. The standard of living. So the standard of living, it doesn't have to be in monetary terms. It can be your happiness, quality of life.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
These are things that are innate in all human beings. I want to wake up and I want to feel good, and I've done some shorts on these on my YouTube channel. That is a driving economic variable. Ultimately, we are animals, and we need to feel good. So, and that could include our family. So we want our family and our friends to feel good around us, and that involves the quality of life. Are we communicating? Are we happy? And what can we do economically to foster that? That is outside of the profit driven.
Yes, I really agree. I really agree with you, because so that very good answer. And I think that is something, I think that maybe we should be conveying up front. People get involved in a project and they say, well, we're going to make a fiscal return on it? Are we going to get an income? Or we're going to, actually, if we do this over a period of time, our basically our general lifestyle will get better. And so this is about like a small group together working on a project to make the standard of living better. Right. I mean, standard of living is also a bigger sort of.
Daniel, do we have a time limit on restream for our streams?
No, but today I actually got to get going.
That's fine, because we are reaching the 2-hour mark, and it's not that I'm trying to cut the conversation off. I just wanted to make sure. I wasn't too sure if we did have a time limit and we're cut off and I don't get to say goodbye to all these fine individuals in our chat.
Wow. Okay. Let's put Landis up there. My concern is real social is a real social safety net that people can't fall through. As a Mayflower descendant, it pains me to have come to the conclusion that way too many cannot have life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Yeah. All right. I would say more on that to come. She starts with my concern, and I think that's, doesn't deserve an answer. I think that's a good one to finish on. What do you think, Ty?
I think actually, I echo the actual comment itself. And I think that's what I kind of stated in my last answer. What is important to us as individuals, like truly at our core. If you can sit and ask yourself, what is important to me, before you worry about the noise of different economists and political figures, just sit and ask yourself, sit in a quiet room while you're alone, what is important to me? Like, and have that honest question to yourself and answer it. And then from that answer, whatever it may be, start directing your life in that direction. Maybe. We're at the end. We're going to cut it off. We went 2 hours, and everybody stayed for the after show, even after the 2 big stars left. So thank you. We're going to do this every week, of course. We greatly appreciate everybody that commented. We greatly appreciated having Steve Grumbine on. We always appreciate that Steve Keen is on, considering it's Steve Keen and Friends. It kind of makes sense that he comes on the show. I'm grateful that Daniel Sanderson is with me every week. He has become a good friend of mine, and I'm grateful that my wife allows me all this time on a Saturday morning to do this. So we will see you next week, same time, same. I'm copying somebody else's podcast. I shouldn't do that. I'll do it. Same bat channel. See you next week.